Hello all, good morning, afternoon, day, or evening to you, wherever you may find yourself. My name is Addison Hamlet, and this is Existential Crisis. Today, let us start by picturing ourselves in a world so dimly lit. Candles and the sun are its only vices. We notice hues of orange, some spots of red, hints of pink here and there. We see colors that ignite passion, colors that suggest delicacy, colors that heed caution. We feel just how hot the air is when it touches our skin, making our arm hairs stand up and goosebumps ignite. It is almost spicy, almost like blinking requires great strength, so our eyes are always made piercingly aware. Our belongings, if we have any, are all transparent and fragile, glass-made or sheer fabric, but tinted with that same warm coloring, slightly obstructing or dimming the view of things through them. Our noses smell something sweet and tempting, but not at all like candy or a bakery, more like fruit platters and cane sugar. It also smells like period blood, specifically period blood. Our little body lives in a little home in an even littler town, though we can't excuse the area of vacant land around it, so huge, and specifically, there is a massive, ginormous building ways away from the rest of the village, like a castle. It is so distant, though desperately so. It is so inaccessible. It is almost not a part of the town at all. Our furniture and decor is wooden and compactable. Every table, chair, and bed is foldable. We bring our things with us where we go, though only if it is needed, and fear leaving nothing behind. There are old streetlights, though often dim or blinking, and old lamps that must be lit. The area lays on hilltops, so everything is on an incline. We must walk uphill to arrive at the town square. On our way, we ignore the stinging in our thighs that has become tolerable from day after repetitive day, and focus our attention on the homes we are passing. Each one becomes more adorned and larger the closer we come to reaching the top of the hill. It only takes us 30 minutes today, a whole 10 minutes faster than yesterday. We have reached the town square, and that, my friends, is where our story begins. What we have just entered is the town of Fuenteovejuna, a Spanish village circa 1476, fiery and tangible with its atmosphere of tyranny. Today we discuss the real-life story of Fuenteovejuna, also known as the Sheep Well or the Sheep Fountain, the history that surrounds it, and its playwright, Lope de Vega. The history of performances and translations in both Spanish and English, with insights on the treatment of the play in varying cultures. And finally, the story's natural inclination towards female empowerment, its relevance in relation to the strides being made for women in society, in arts and literature during Siglo de Oro, and about transcendence worldwide. We'll start with the historical context. Fuenteovejuna, also known as Fuenteovejuna, is a small Spanish town with a modern-day population of roughly 5,000, with a history so rich it was legacized by a one Lope de Vega. Imagine. The year is 1476 AD, and word reaches the Spanish monarchs Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand that the townspeople of Fuenteovejuna have just madly, unjustly, and collectively murdered their commander, Gomez de Guzman, in the midst of an invasion from the order of Calatrava. 2-decade-old Grand Master Rodrigo Tellez Giron leads the Knights of the Order towards the city, pledging allegiance to Princess Juana of Castile and Alfonso V of Portugal. Pause. Wait, why was Guerin pledging his allegiance again? To make a long story short, in 1774, Alfonso V of Portugal traveled to Spain in an attempt to renounce the throne from Isabella and secure it for her sister, Princess Juana of Castile. 2 years later, and the battle is officially over. Juana and Alfonso were no match for Isabella and Ferdinand, who stomped their troops at the Battle of Toro in 1476. So, here's how the story goes. When we open in the town of Fuenteovejuna, the commander, Gomez de Guzman, is hot and heated at the absence of Rodrigo Tellez, master of the Order of Calatrava. Guzman makes some pretty prophetic statements before Rodrigo arrives, who reassures his commander that he simply had not gotten word at all. Gomez then, making sure to mention the master's new position and young age, convinces Rodrigo to storm Ciudad Real with him, as to take over the city, apparently in allegiance to Princess Juana, though Gomez doubts her ability to lead as well. This is some strong foreshadowing about his opinion and treatment of women in general. Next thing we know, the pair is leading troops off to the city, and the story picks up in the town square a few days later, where citizens are gathering. Two in particular, Laurencia and Pascuala, who are deep in discussion about the way Guzman persists Laurencia and his tendency to sexually use and abuse the women of the town. While conversing with other patrons of the village, the commander and master conveniently ride into town, successfully having taken over Ciudad Real. While the townspeople are all glorifying Guzman, he orders his duet of henchmen, Flores and Ortuno, to kidnap both Pascuala and Laurencia for the commander's pleasure. Because what's better than non-consensual sex? A non-consensual three-way! The goons attack and capture the women, but are just as quickly fought off, the women escaping. Meanwhile, in Ciudad Real, a couple of aldermen make their way to the feet of Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand, confessing the horrors of what the master and commander had subjected the city to. Promptly, the royals send out their own army to combat the terrorism. It is after this that we see Laurencia and Frondoso speaking in the forest. Frondoso is professing his love to Laurencia, though she, on the other hand, would be much happier eating good food and spending her nights alone. She despises the nature in which everyone discusses and rumors about them, and essentially rejects him when, once again, super conveniently, Commander Gomez de Guzman enters on a hunting spree, and Frondoso quickly hides, leaving Laurencia to be discovered by Guzman. This is when Guzman attempts to, trigger warning, force himself onto Laurencia. Frondoso, being the heroic character that he is, grabs Guzman's completely forgotten about bow and arrow, pointing it against the commander until he and Laurencia can escape. Guzman vows vengeance. Unsurprisingly, though his efforts might as well be dispersed to every man in the village, as he quickly pisses them off as well. In a town meeting, he boldly tells Esteban, a magistrate who just so happens to be Laurencia's father, that she needs to be reprimanded for rejecting him in a way none of the other women dared to. It is now that the other members of the council bring to attention Guzman's disrespect and abuse of the women around the village, many of who are married, so therefore dishonoring of their husbands as well. Guzman insults them promptly, claiming them peasants, and of course, peasants have no means to lose the honor they never had. He exits in an irate, butthurt huff. Luckily, a soldier brings word of the armies the king sent, and the master and commander must ride off. This doesn't stop the commander's knaves from attempting to kidnap a woman by the name of Jacinta and bring her to Ciudad Real for the commander to pillage upon. Naturally. Mingo, another villager, defends her honor, but then is flogged horrifically by the goons. Back in Ciudad Real, the master and commander are no match for Isabel and Fernando's patrols. Hooray! Also, Laurencia is totally wooed by Frondoso standing up to the icky commander and agrees to marry him. Her dad, Esteban, is also down with the pairing. They then prepare and have their wedding, but of course, it is interrupted by Mr. Buzzkill himself, freaking Gomez de Guzman. This fool not only arrests Frondoso, but has the nerve to straight up kidnap Laurencia and start thrashing her father when he protests. Laurencia manages away and appears in the middle of a secret town meeting that night to discuss how to survive against the commander. She is covered in bruises and cuts, one she earned from beating off the commander and his servants from raping her. The men and women of the town all collectively decide it is time to storm the commander's home, and just in time, as he is about to conduct Frondoso's hanging, when they enter, chanting, "Fuenteovejuna! Fuenteovejuna!" The men brandish Guzman as the women batter the two henchmen. Unfortunately, Flores makes it out alive and runs to the aid of Isabel and Fernando, claiming the villagers to have unrightfully thrown Guzman from a window, dismembering his body. Fernando decides an investigation is due. As the villagers are celebrating their freedom, the king's judge then enters to investigate Guzman's disappearance. Even through torture and torment, the townspeople still state that Fuenteovejuna did it. Isabel and Fernando then take it upon themselves to visit the town where the master begs for and is granted their forgiveness. The judge explains his discoveries, and Laurencia, Frondoso, and Esteban appeal to the royals. Fernando decides, though the crime be serious, that since there was little to no evidence, the whole town should be pardoned. In the end, Frondoso shows gratitude to the king and queen for their conscious and caring ruling. First off, the story is pretty close to the truth of the real-life Fuenteovejuna, right down to the refusal to admittance by the townspeople, even when being tortured. Some slight differences. Ciudad Real is about 200 kilometers away from Fuenteovejuna, so roughly 2.5 hours by car. The murder of Gomez de Guzman occurred during an attack on Ciudad Real led by Master of the Order Rodrigo Tellez. This we know. Guzman had been in control for some years, though the events of the play take place over a span of a few weeks or so. And lastly, Guzman actually lived in Almagro, a town located in Ciudad Real. For metaphorical staging purposes, he's a little closer in the play. Now, let's talk about the developments that burgeoned between 1476, when the real-life events of Fuenteovejuna took place, and 1614, when Vega published Fuenteovejuna. Spain unifies under the Habsburgs' rule between 1516 and 1700. This establishes Spain as a world superpower, especially because of the discovery of the New World. Lope de Vega's birth is actually perfectly placed in the peak of Siglo de Oro, the Golden Century, a time period in which art and literature bloomed throughout Spain. So let's talk about the playwright. Lope de Vega is born on November 25th, 1562, a Scorpio-Sagittarius cusp. Yay! But a man, so debatably, yay! He added to his humble family parents Francisca Ferdinand Flores and Felix de Vega in Cantabria, Spain. Lupe's padre worked as an embroiderer, though we know little of his madre. As a boy, Lupe is swift and intelligent. By 5, able to read fluent Spanish and Latin, even composing some verses. At age 10, he composes whole verses, and the boy soon moves to Madrid as to study with Vicente Espinel, a Spanish writer and musician, only 12 years Lupe's senior. Lupe looks up to his mentor greatly and later begins schooling at the study of the Compañía de Jesús, commonly referred to as the Imperial School. From 1577 to 1581, he studies in the University of Alcalá de Henares, though left with no laurels to show. Apparently, it is his rowdy lifestyle that dispels his mentors, who promptly retract payments for his schooling, forcing Lupe to work as a secretary of aristocrats or writing comedias. Eventually, in 1583, the young man enlists in the Marines and pursues with troops at the Battle of Terceira Island. After studying at the University of Alcalá de Henares, he becomes heavily involved in the theater world at age 21 when he begins to write many a play in dedication to his lover, Elena Osorio, a successful actress, also daughter to an actor, her father being her manager. Their romance ends tragically when she leaves Lupe and instead marries the Cardinal of Grandella, apparently for his wealth, in 1587. Lupe surely rants about his ex-madam and her kin, slandering their name. He is swiftly convicted of libel and, for 8 years, exiled from Madrid, for 2 years, exiled from Castile. While exiled, Lupe gets engaged to and weds Isabel de Urbina. For social and economic and maybe romantic purposes. This same year, 1588, Lupe sails with the Spanish Armada to attack Britain. It didn't go so well. Following this, the young playwright and his wife move to Valencia, and it is here that his career skyrockets. When his banishment from Castile is fulfilled, they hop around to Toledo, Alba de Torres, where Lupe enters the service of the Duke of Alba, the primo of noblemen that Lupe would serve until he himself becomes a priest in 1613. In 1594, Isabel dies during childbirth. Heartbroken, Lupe returns to Madrid once his exile from the court was over, presumably with his son. He remarries to Juana de Gardo in 1598, daughter of a meat supplier for the court. Juana is actually suggested not to marry him for financial reasons, but she is madly in love with him, despite his unfaithfulness throughout their relationship. Juana gives birth to Carlos Felix, their son, and 3 daughters. Lupe begins work as a secretary again for the foreseeable Count of Lemos, who he lives with until 1603, then departs for Seville. In Seville, he meets an actress named Michaela, who is married, but excuses this and goes forth with spawning not 1, not 2, but 5 children with Lope de Vega, one of whom, Marcela de San Felix, later in her life becomes a well-known nun and playwright. Vega fractions his life between 2 families and a very large handful of lovers. He also takes on the job of pleasing them all, writing so many plays and poems to stable his income, though many of his works are published by different publishers without his consent or any corrections. Justice comes at the turn of the century when Vega is finally able to review a few works in 1600 and wrestles, metaphorically, for rights to his plays, so others might not attempt to publish without his consent. 5 years later, he is employed by the Duke of Sessa, then joining the Oratory in Oliver Street in 1610. This is around the time that the writer loses Carlos Felix, his favorite son, in 1612, from a mere fever, and Juana de Gardo, his second wife, dies a year later during childbirth. Now, evidently, Juana is the one lover he does not write to or about professionally. Whatever their relationship, the trauma and PTSD of this alone would cause strain on any person's mental health, prompting Lupe into, as one might say, an existential crisis. The man turns to priesthood in search of peace, and this shows in his literature from the time, as its subtext was deeply metaphorical, religious, and inspired by philosophical thought of the time. Don't think being an ordained priest might keep this romantic from continuing to pursue beautiful women. In fact, the Duke of Sessa, in fear of losing Vega as a secretary, offered him lovers, often. Lupe soon falls for the likes of Marta de Neveres, who loves him until her death in 1628, even through her permanent blinding in 1626. Tragically, his flock of children continue to die off one by one, Yet and still, not until his passing in 1635 does de Vega cease to publish romantic novels, and an estimated number of anywhere from 340 plays to 1,800. An additional 3,000 sonnets, 3 novels, 4 novellas, and 9 epic poems believed to be under his belt. In his final years, Lope writes mainly comedy and philosophical poems, using the alias Tome de Burgues. 2 of his most notable works include El Caballero de Olmedo, the story of a young nobleman who rides to and from Olmedo to Medina to court a girl, though warned that if he continues, he will meet with an unhappy fate, and Pervenez et el Comedor de Ocana, a play on country life that includes a villainous nobleman and a king who champions the commoner. Finally, we'll dabble into the performance history, female empowerment, and feminist propaganda. With historical context now established, let us discuss the performance history of Fuenteovejuna. It was a struggle to find much information about the original performances, though they surely occurred, and with real women on stage, as this was a show that not only empowered women of the age, was in a place that featured women on the stage in early times, but also had a golden age, Siglo de Oro, that triumphed many Spanish female playwrights, including Filancia Enrique de Guzman, author of Tragicomedy of the Chaban Gardens and Fields, and Maria de Zayas et Sotomayor, author of La Traición en la Amistad. Helena Modjeska, a Polish-American actress who turned her attentions to Shakespeare and tragedy during her lifetime in the mid-1800s to early 20th century, recounts 3 women appearing in performance roles in the early 16th century. 3 ladies were seen embodying the 3 Marys in the city of Metz. This is seemingly in correlation to possible performances occurring in female convents, a tradition that persisted from the age of Hirschwitze, the world's first female playwright who specialized in morality plays and formatted the modern-day drama as we know it. These performances were forbidden by bishops, though in some cases they were known to be of custom. Not too long later at all, during the reign of Charles V, we see a female appear as a frequent and professional actress in Spain. Of course, Charles V, son to Philip II, decides he wants to prohibit her with a special edict. It didn't take too long for the prohibition to fall to the wayside, though, and this professional actress became one of many. We also know that there were organizations of strolling players, traveling actors at the time. Augustin de Rojas attests that of the 6 organizations he knew of, the less popular ones would feature women's parts personated by men, the middle ones might feature women or boys, but if going to view a performance put on by the Farandula or Campania, all the female parts were played by women. Most interestingly, in 1586, Spain made an attempt to give alternate performances for men and women if going to the theater. Apparently, the senoras and senoritas of Madrid preferred matinees, and so that became their regular time. Not so surprisingly, the authorities banned this custom, and a matinee that sold 760 tickets was instantly refunded. This kind of consideration was not reestablished until many, many years later in America. Speaking of America, this is a perfect opportunity to mention performance history. The very first performance recorded in the news was actually a translated version of the text in 1936, occurring at an experimental theater, the Vassar, in Poughkeepsie, New York. This was in fact the first of many American showings, many continuing to this day. In Kathleen Costala's article, Staging Fuenteovejuna in the Borderlands, she goes so far as to explain the difficulties encountered when attempting to appeal to audiences in Tucson, Arizona, with the theater company Borderlands Theater, with a mission statement specifically aimed at offering translations of plays in both Spanish and English to borderland towns. Costala states, in Tuscan, however, the Spanish language version was so sparsely attended that one of the performances had to be changed from Spanish to English. This is surprising, given the many successes of productions both in English and in Spanish at the Siglo de Oro Festival in El Paso, another border town. one is left to wonder what this says about the culture of the borderland towns. Is it a matter of language and understanding, or of preference and resistance to immerse fully in a culturally exact retelling of a story?
One, two, three, four!
The truth isn't always pretty, unless it is written in verse. Lope de Vega's Fuenteovejuna is a historical, literary, culturally informative masterpiece that works as a civil rights piece for the ages and transcends the bounds of space or time. As we leave this tempered town, just know it is always but a read or watch away. I hope you all enjoyed, and till next time, this has been Existential Crisis.